people are chasing that 100%, I don't think they're ever going to find it in anything. But that may dictate where that discipline and focus is going to be.
In the NFL, as a strength coach, you are not a culture setter. You're not an authority figure. You're not a disciplinarian. You are pretty much exclusively there to train the guys. If you just dialed in your nutrition, that would probably add years to your career. Not only would they transform their physique, add more muscle, it'd benefit them from a recovery standpoint.
It's time to sit down, keep it real, and cut the bullshit. Welcome to Table Talk. All right, guys, we're back with another episode of Table Talk. Today, my guest is John Heck. Going to abbreviate this because we're going to go over your timeline quite a bit.
Yes, sir.
Former Division I player. Basically, football was your life for, well, we'll talk about that too, up until a couple years ago.
Yeah.
Former player, then strength coach, and for NFL, NCAA. I'm sure you worked with some high school kids here and there. So from the standpoint of the strength and conditioning coach, you've basically worked with everybody across the spectrum, and powerlifting, strongman as well.
Yeah.
Little bit of, I don't want to say bodybuilding, but training kind of as that. So the realm of your training is kind of across all spectrums.
I've got intentions to step on stage this year. So at that point, I can officially add bodybuilding to the resume.
But can you? Because like one time, it's like a power lifter. If they did it one time, they power lifted.
Yeah.
And twice, they're the power lifter.
No, that's a good point. That's a good point. I will have competed in a bodybuilding show.
Got it.
By the end of the year.
Before we get going, I got a gift for you.
Oh.
Go ahead and pop that open.
Yes, sir.
There's a shirt in there, which we hope shall fit. It's a 3X.
3X, that should be good. I'm growing right now, so it might not fit in a few months.
Yeah. The book in there, the notebook, training log, whatever you want to call it, is made out of the same supplier that makes our P2 powerlifting belts. I had custom make these binder covers or leather covers. And then the coin in there, it's a reward coin.
Yeah.
And I've been giving those out for years to people that amplify the vision of Elite FTS to live, learn, and pass on. So can't buy it. You know, it's an earned thing for those people that I do feel embody what that vision is.
Oh, thank you.
So I want to thank you for coming out, and there you go.
Yes, sir. No, thank you for having me. It's an honor to be here. This is freaking awesome. I'll be using this as a logbook, actually. This is perfect. Thank you.
So where I want to start, because there's a lot of history we can go into here. So let's start with high school football.
Yeah.
So your dad was a coach, actually player.
He was. Yep. So my dad, he played 12 years in the NFL. He played tight end and then offensive tackle at Notre Dame. He was part of the 1988 national championship team, played under Lou Holtz, was a first-round draft pick to the Seattle Seahawks. He played left tackle, played 5 years with the Seahawks, 5 years with the Bears, and then 2 years with the then Redskins.
Mm-hmm.
Then he went into coaching. So I've been growing up in a football household my entire life. And my brother, he plays offensive tackle in the NFL right now. So, you know, dad played and coached offensive line. So it's been a offensive line upbringing for me.
So growing up on grass, field, turf, and rubber.
Yeah, exactly. You know, going in with dad to when he was a player, going in with him to the facility. When he was a coach, just going in with him. And that's kind of where I first got my exposure to strength and conditioning. And I'm sure we'll get into that.
Yeah.
But he'd take me into work, and I'd always tend to gravitate towards the weight room.
Well, that's where my interest is because throughout other podcasts that I've heard you on, the strength and conditioning, if there's a balance, you know, with a lot of players, just a lot of athletes in high school, you know, the balance tips one way or the other.
Right.
Right. If for the players, it's all there, then the strength and conditioning is essentially, it's still GPP anyhow, but it's what they have to do.
Mm-hmm.
Then with other ones, the strength and conditioning is like the primary focus. It seems like, listening to what I've heard you say, that's kind of always been the primary focus.
Yeah. I always tell people that the off-season training, like that was my in-season. The actual football part, I mean, that was almost secondary to me, just in terms of where my passion was. And that really became more and more the case as I got into college. and, as my college career progressed, I was just so passionate about the training in the summer and in the winter. And I'd spend the whole football season just looking forward to the off season again.
Where do you think that stemmed from?
Well, I don't think my passion was ever truly in football. I grew up in a football household. I was big. I was good at it. It was kind of just almost like a predetermined path for me, right? So I just did it. I never, quote unquote, chose it. I didn't love it, but I always loved the weight room. Ever since I was a little kid, I started lifting weights in 7th grade. And from that point on, I was hooked. I think my early exposure, just going in with dad to work, going into the facility, and just having sort of just a natural gravitation towards the strength coaches in the weight room, and just something about it. And, I remember the first time I got under a bar and bench press, it just, I don't know, it felt right. And that always stuck with me. And I carried that with me through my whole football career. And then as I learned more and more about it and got stronger and better, it really kind of cultivated my love for it.
I'm just thinking you're a kid, and you're walking around and they're out on the field and you're bored to death, right? Then you go in the weight room and you get all excited about that. But it wasn't that long ago that you were working for the Jaguars, right? As a strength and conditioning coach.
So I didn't work for my dad coached for the Jaguars.
Yes.
Yep. He was there for years. I was with the Houston Texans.
Okay. So you were with the Texans?
Yep.
Okay. So not that long ago. So what's the gap between there? 2 decades maybe, from you being a kid, just kind of wandering around.
Yeah.
And then what would be the biggest standout change? I know there's a fuck ton of changes, right? But what's the biggest standout change that you see from how it was then to how it is now?
Yeah.
And
so
you can't say technology.
No. Well, that is
a big one.
So I remember when I was going into work for my dad at the Jaguars, the coach at the time was Marcus Sonovich, and they were huge into the high intensity training, HIT, a lot of machine work. I walked into that weight room and it was just rows and rows and rows of machines, a lot of hammer strength stuff. And nowadays, you walk into an NFL weight room, you'll see hardly any machines, and things have gravitated a lot more towards Olympic lifts, obviously free weight stuff, a lot of sports specific type training. And, I've got my opinions on that kind of stuff. But bottom line is, back in that era, in the earlier 2000s, it was a lot of machine work, more of a bodybuilding approach, training to failure.
More HIIT training.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Whereas now it's really, the pendulum has swung away from that, and you hardly see any machines in a football weight room. So
how was your training then in college? Like, is high school, we're just going to assume high school when it comes to, well, I'm not going to assume that. Was it a somewhat good high school conditioning program?
It was decent. We had pretty good facilities. It was the classic case of one of the football coaches is the strength coach running the weight room. We didn't have a true strength and conditioning coach. So, looking back at what we were doing, I don't think it was anything, super intelligent from a programming standpoint, but we pushed hard in the weight room. It was heavily emphasized. We grinded in there. So from that standpoint, we were doing some good things. You look at some high school programs and they have nothing. There's no semblance of a training program, and we were working hard. But when I got to college, we were, I don't want to speak negatively on our strength coach. I loved him. He was a great guy, but it was a very meathead kind of old school approach to training. From a programming standpoint, it's probably not how I would do things now. It was just a lot of squatting, benching, hang cleans, not necessarily a ton of technique emphasized, but, loading the bar up, going heavy, a lot of low volume stuff. So, my first strength coach in college, like I said, I loved him. He excelled as a disciplinarian. As a strength coach in college, you're not just there to train the guys. Like, you're there to be a culture setter. You're there to build accountability and discipline and all those variables within the team. And he did an amazing job of that. I think the programming may have, been the weakness a little bit. And you'll see some coaches, it's the opposite. Like some coaches in college, they're fantastic programmers. The training itself is dialed in, but then they don't have much of a role elsewhere.
That's a topic that I want to talk about, because I've been to several programs to observe the training.
Yeah.
And in many cases, what I see is what I would probably define as a clusterfuck.
Yep.
Just as far as movement patterns. I mean, even with its machines or whatever it is, it's just hitching and just all kinds of stupid shit, force reps, crazy shit. But the one time it really, it resonated with me in a different way, because the way they were grouped out and the way that they were synchronized, from field to rubber, from field to the gym, the way they operated, in everything that would develop a culture was way on point, to where when I was traveling back from that, I had this, two voices in my head,
Yep.
like, this could be the reason why this team's always in the top 10, because this might matter more than the intricacies of all the other programming aspects. Because I've seen others, as you've said, where everything's on point, but once they break, or if they're moving from turf to gym, it's a clusterfuck, and there's no leaders. There's no hierarchy of groups, pods, whatever you want to call that, of that going on, to where I'd love to hear your thoughts on that, because it's easy as an outsider that didn't grow up in that culture. And I think a lot of people do this.
Yeah.
It's easy for them to look in and to criticize, but they're missing what might be the biggest aspect of what's truly going on.
Right. Yeah. Over the course of my career, I've gone back and forth on this, debating with myself, which is more important, the training or, the intangible impact that you have on the team as a strength and conditioning coach. And first of all, this is really only relevant to college football. Mm-hmm. In the NFL, as a strength coach, you are not a culture setter. You're not an authority figure. You're not a disciplinarian. You are pretty much exclusively there to train the guys.
This episode of Table Talk is brought to you by Troponin Supplements, a company that's changing the game when it comes to performance supplements. Today, I want to talk to you about the 3 supplements that I like best. ATP is your go-to supplement when you need fast, clean energy and sharp mental focus without the crash. It gives me that focus and the energy that I'm looking for, and doesn't have the crash at the end like you find with a lot of other supplements that are out there. Next up is Field Rations, which is my go-to intra-workout. It's no stim, but it provides all the nutrients to allow for better recovery and better stamina, so to say. And then there's Suppressor Max. This is for anyone that loves carbs but wants to be able to handle them a little bit better. It helps your body use carbs more efficiently, keeps blood sugar steady, and gives you better energy after meals without that sugar crash. Head over to Troponin Supplements and use the code TABLETALK for 10% off your order.
So that's a huge difference between college and pro football. But looking at college ball, I always wanted the training to be it. Like, I always wanted it to be a case of the program that has the best training, that is going to be the way to benefit the team the most. And over the course of my career, my opinion on that shifted a little bit. The reality is, if you're in a program that has gifted athletes, it doesn't matter what the fuck you do with them in training. As long as you don't break them, as long as you get them to the field on Saturday, they're going to look at a barbell and they're going to progress. You go to a top program that has top recruits. They're the genetically elite. They're 18, 19-year-old kids. Over the course of their career in college, as long as you don't break them, they're going to get bigger. They're going to get faster. They're going to get stronger, no matter what kind of training you do.
Yeah, but you got to manage their ego.
Exactly. So that's what I was going to say. Yeah. Those types of guys, it is crucial that the team building is crucial. The discipline is crucial, especially in today's day and age of college football with NIL and transfer portal. You've got all these different personalities and egos coming into the team, and guys have been paid. And if you can hold a high standard as a strength and conditioning coach, when you're managing the discipline, where you're making guys coachable and you're instilling a tough, gritty, disciplined, attention to detail type culture within a team like that, I think that has a bigger impact than the X's and O's of training. Now, with that said, you look at a program that's kind of on the other end of the spectrum, a less talented program. You know, you look at an Army, like those kids, you don't have to worry about disciplining those kids. Like those are already the yes sir, no sir type of kids. They're going to work their ass off no matter what. Those kids are already in line, but they're less talented. So I think in a program like that, the training does have a bigger impact. And I think you'll see that, you know, you look at some of the strength and conditioning programs in smaller schools, they're doing it better from a training standpoint, from a programming standpoint, than a lot of the big dogs. But then you go to the Alabamas and the Michigans and other programs like that, they might be doing it better from the culture side of things. A lot of those strength coaches, you know, the Scott Cochrans from Alabama, you know, you look at their training programs, it's nothing that's going to blow you away, but you look at just the charisma they have, the way they command the respect of the team, the way the guys buy into them, you know, that's a special thing, and that goes a long way for a team.
Well, they spend more time with the strength coach than they do any other coach.
Oh, yeah.
Right?
You're with the strength coach year round.
Yeah, without a doubt. So when that, and before we move on, since you played and coached at that level, I don't think most people understand, and there's two sides of this, what a day looks like, right? So what does a day look like as a player? And then what does a day look like as a coach?
Yeah. So, I mean, as a player in college, I mean, let's just talk about in season, I guess.
Yeah.
So you'll go to class. At least when I was a player, I had all my classes in the morning, and then somewhere within a break in my schedule, I'd have a scheduled lift. We'd train in season 3 days a week. So we'd go in there, lift, shower, go back to class. We'd have, you know, breakfast and lunch served to us at the facility. And then after school, come back, we'd have meetings. We'd have team meeting, position meetings, go out to practice, you know, come in, dinner would be served. And then, you know, different days of the week, we'd have a different schedule in season, different levels of intensity of practice, lots of time spent in the meetings, lots of time on your own, doing film study, things of that nature. But then on the coaching side of it, I mean,
so basically no free time and your whole day scheduled out.
Yeah, absolutely. No, it's a full-time job as a player. It's a full-time job because, I mean, you've got school, which, I mean, for most players, it's kind of just do enough with school to be eligible, right? But then you've got hours and hours of meetings. You'll have, you know, most guys have to be in the training room for something, whether it's, you know, rehabbing an injury or just getting some general treatment for aches and pains that pop up in the season. You've got your own independent film study. I mean, I would do all of my kind of watching film of my matchup, the guy I was one-on-one going against in the upcoming game. I do a lot of film study on my own, just watching that guy. Whereas when we're meeting as a group, we're going over more of the schematics, watching their defense as a whole, installing our offense and any wrinkles we have in the game plan for that week. So independent film study, looking at their personnel, and then meeting as a position group, meeting as a team, then of course practice, and then we'll have a few lifts throughout the week. You know, and then we play. Every Friday, you know, we travel to the team hotel, spend the night there, and then Saturday's game day, and come in on Sunday, tapes graded, watch the film, and go over it, do a little flush out lift.
Yeah, it sounds like a little bit more than just a 40-hour week full-time job.
Yeah, no, it's a grind, and I'm almost like I almost instinctively like describe it like it was, looking back on it compared to the coaching side, like it was easy. You know, as a coach, the coaching side is far more demanding from a time standpoint. So now I look back on my days as a player, I'm like, geez, I kind of had it easy back then. You know, because as a player, it's a huge time commitment. There's tons of pressure. I mean, that's a whole thing in and of itself, just the pressure of being an athlete at that level, especially in football. But everything's provided for you. All of your meals are provided for you. Your training is you've got a coach, it's programmed for you. You've got, massage therapists. You've got a schedule set for you. So as a player, it's hard work. It's lots of hours put in, but you've got a lot of resources provided for you, a lot of people on the staff kind of in service to you. So there's a lot of nice benefits of being a player. Whereas when the coach, now you're in the serving role.
Yeah. So what does that day look like?
Yeah. So like in the off season for strength and conditioning, usually that's a 4 a.m. wake up. We're coming in, the lift groups usually start in the morning. So at my most recent stop, our first lift group was, we'd have a 6:30 a.m. lift group. So we'd meet as a staff we'd be in 5:15. Usually we set up the weight room the night before. So we kind of come in, make any last little setup adjustments, just some of the equipment intricacies. So when the players come in, the entire lift is set, all the racks are prepared, and that's something you don't appreciate as a player, right? You come in and you don't appreciate the fact that 23 racks have been prepared for you, and there's 25 loaded bars, and then your entire 3 warm-up stations have been set up. You don't appreciate the fact that the strength staff spent an hour setting all that up, and then
Christmas elves set it.
Yeah, exactly. And then they've got to break it down for you afterwards. But yeah, as the strength coaches, we come in, we set up, we meet, we go over the program, we just review the training session for the day, and talk about anything that needs to be talked about just from a strategic standpoint. Talk about any injuries that we may have to look out for if certain guys banged up, and usually on the staff we'll all kind of have our roles. Like when I was at North Carolina, I was working with the big men primarily, and their program would be different than the skill guys. So, I'm reviewing kind of my notes for the guys I've got training with me that day. Anyone who's modified within my group, we're just going over all those little details. And then someone will start manning the scale, weigh the guys in, they're coming in, we're getting them to fuel and pushing them to the nutrition staff to go get hydrated, fueled up, all that stuff, and then start the lift. And we'll usually, depending on the program, you might have 2 back-to-back lift groups, you might have 3 back-to-back lift groups, and that's demanding because you're coaching the same hour and a half long training session 3 times in a row, and you got to be able to bring the same juice to the third lift group as you brought to the first lift group, so it's demanding, and you got to be in there. You got to have energy. You got to be projecting, got to be commanding the room, simultaneously, aware of a lot of moving pieces at once, and coaching technique, and, being ready to jump on a guy if he needs it, if he needs getting called out, or, all those things. So you got to be on as a strength coach in football. It's a room full of alpha males, and you got to earn their respect, and to be a disciplinarian, to be a culture setter within the team, you got to have the guys trust you and respect you and buy into you. Like if you're gonna snap on a guy or yell at a guy, like there needs to be trust there, right? Otherwise you're just going to turn that kid away from you. We always want to have a good relationship with our guys to where we can say something that's hard for them to hear and they respond to it constructively. We need to be able to have all the respect of the guys. We want them to like us and trust us, but they also need to respect us and understand that if they step out of line, they're going to get their ass ripped.
Well, I don't think people understand the mental demands that you're speaking about, to where if they just walk into their gym, hopefully it's a hardcore gym, and then while they're walking around, if they had to take note of what everybody was doing, or not everybody, because there's multiple coaches, but say 10 people, you got to keep track of what 10 people are doing at all times. The weights on the bar, the intensity, the effort of all of them at the same time is mentally demanding.
Oh yeah.
Right. So once you get through one, your brain kind of wants to go, okay, relax. Then another group comes in.
Yeah. And you'll have a whole different set of personalities in the different groups, because we would try to divide some of our groups kind of by position groups. We try to have, maybe our big men in one lift, our, DBs, wide receivers in another lift. And you're coaching those two groups very differently because those are two very different types of personalities. The big men come in, generally they're more receptive to the weight room. Like they're going to be more into getting under the bar, loading some heavy weights, versus the prima donna wide receiver DB comes in. Those guys don't like the weight room as much. So, finding which buttons to push, how to coach certain guys differently, like you've got to have that awareness. You got to have the awareness of who you're coaching and speaking to them differently and finding different ways to motivate them. But then to your point, like, you've got to be locked in to the movement quality, to the technique, to all those things. And when you're coaching a lot of guys at once, I mean, if one thing goes wrong with an important player, like, your ass is getting fired.
Yeah.
Like, that can't happen. So you've got to have eyes on the back of your head. And that's a skill you kind of develop with experience. And, people always ask me, like, what book should I read to get more into strength and conditioning? And I'm like, look, I don't want to tell you not to study. You should. But the thing you need to do is, like, get in front of some athletes, get in front of some people and learn how to navigate a weight room, like learn how to coach multiple people at once, learn how to, be able to see a lot of things at once and project and be effectively verbal and give coaching cues. Like the art of coaching gets lost sometimes. And I think some people spend too much time on the academics, the textbook, the X's and O's, and they never really get good at coaching a room.
Yeah.
Right. And that's something that you've got to develop a skill for, and it's mentally taxing.
So what happens after the sessions are over then as a coach?
After all of them are over?
Yeah.
And then it's cleanup time usually. So, the last athlete leaves and we're trying to get some fellowship with them on the way out. We're talking with them. We're dapping them up. We're, if any of the guys who may be banged up, we're talking to them. Hey, how's this feeling? What can we modify next time? Maybe there's some guys hanging back, doing some extra stuff. And so we'll be around talking to the guys until the last guy's out the door. And then you look around the weight room and it looks like a bomb went off. You got 25 racks, weights everywhere. And, depending on the program, you might have a little army of interns who can, pick up some of the brunt of that stuff. But, this last team I was on, Troy, we were a smaller program and we were a smaller staff. And so we were all doing cleanup together. And that's something I respected about how we did things was, we always kept that intern mentality, and that's part of the culture of being a strength coach, is kind of blue collar, hard work. And so, spend half an hour cleaning up the weight room and sweeping, vacuum, mop, wiping down benches, get it looking, recruit ready. Because that's another thing in college football. It's like, you never know when tours of recruits are coming by, and that fucking weight room better be pristine. If the head man is coming down with a 5-star recruit, that thing better look show ready.
Yeah.
So we always try to keep the weight room in college, we call it recruit ready. After that, we'll kind of debrief the lift. So we'll meet, we'll review everything and talk about how certain individuals did, talk about how did the flow of the lift as a whole go, what could be done better. We'll kind of go around, give our thoughts and make notes for next time. And then just kind of discuss the next lift and go over all that stuff, grab something to eat. And then depending on the schedule, that's probably your time to get your own training session in. And then probably have guys coming back from class wanting to do mobility work, extra stuff like that, recovery, all those things. So, you're there all day. And then in season, you've got your lift groups, but then you've got practice. And strength staff is handling, you said, technology.
Are you looking to boost recovery, enhance your sex drive, and improve performance in the gym? Do you think your hormones are out of whack and you're tired of getting the runaround from your doctor? Things like your hormones are just fine, stop lifting heavy weights, etc., etc., etc. I know what that feels like, as I've been down that road most of my life. This is why we've partnered with Merrick Health. Merrick Health is a premium telehealth platform that specializes in hormone optimization and preventative medicine, ensuring a better quality of life. Merrick Health offers a table talk panel tailored for our listeners, featuring comprehensive tests like total and free testosterone, sensitive estradiol, and advanced markers like lipoprotein A and IGF-1. These comprehensive panels of up to 84 carefully selected biomarkers allow you to identify areas of enhancement and maximize your physical, cognitive, and sexual performance. It's much different than the panels you may get from your doctor. Choose between self-service options where you can select lab panels based upon decades of experience, or opt for guided optimization with your own health coach. Start with a detailed breakdown of your labs and receive personalized treatment options, both over-the-counter and prescription. Visit merrickhealth.com/tabletalk and use the code TABLETALK to get 10% off your first order. Merrick Health isn't just about better health, it's about empowering you to take control of your well-being.
Now we're handling the GPS stuff. All right. So let's say in season, we do all of our morning lifts, debrief afterwards. Well, now we're getting ready for practice. So we're getting all the GPS units set up. We're going over the, the plan for practice, because the strength staff will often have a role in collaborating with the football coaches on periodizing practice throughout the week. Because, I mean, we try to periodize it similar to how we might periodize a week in training, just in terms of there being higher output days, lower output days, and getting them to kind of peak on Saturday for game day. So we'll collaborate with the coaches on that, as far as the length of practice, the duration that we're going to spend. And yeah, that's a battle. That's a battle. You know, certain football coaches are more receptive than others to what the sports science says, to what the strength coaches say. And you know, that's one of the things I don't love about football strength and conditioning, is having those battles with the football coaches.
Well, now you have to manage those personalities too.
Oh yeah.
So you have the personalities of the players and the personalities of the coaches.
Yeah. I mean, and then you got to remember, as a strength coach, you work for the head football coach. You are an assistant coach to the head football coach. So what the head football coach says goes, right? But you also want to, you want to serve your role. You want to make sure that you're providing the good data and input that he needs to hear, but you got to know your place and know kind of when to push and when to just put your ego aside and just accept that, okay, we might be going a little bit more old school with our approach to practice. And that's
so with the GPS data, what exactly are you getting from that data? Are you getting intensity of the steps?
Yeah. So one of the key metrics we look at with the Catapult data, and I say Catapult, that's the company we use with the GPS data. We'll look at high speed yardage. So we'll have, kind of a max speed recorded for each guy. So let's say, a player's top ever recorded speed on the GPS system was 21.5 miles an hour. One of the metrics we'll look at is how much yardage did they cover over 90% of their fastest ever speed. Anything kind of over that 90% intensity, we're really keeping an eye on that metric. That's something we want to control. We don't want a player overdoing their high speed yardage during the practice week. It's going to be heavily fatiguing, potentially putting them at risk for a hamstring.
So how do you control that for linear speed? Because that won't be maximal speed.
Well,
or even like a lineman, for instance.
So we don't really track that with the linemen. That's really something we're primarily just looking at for the skill guys, for, if depending on the defense, certain linebackers and defensive ends that may be dropping into coverage and have more of a speed demand within the scheme. Yeah. Those are the guys we're looking at that metric for. And every week we want to make sure that all of our guys do at least touch 90% of their max speed. We want to maintain their speed, and we also want to keep their hamstrings exposed to moving at high speed. We don't want them going weeks without touching near max velocity, and then they all of a sudden have to do it in a game, chasing down a ball, and then they pop a hammy. So every week we'll keep track of, okay, have all of our skill guys at least touched 90% of top speed? If not, we'll put them in a controlled setting. We'll have them run a build up and hit it, and we'll track it live on the GPS. Yep, he hit it. good to go. But then on the flip side, if we see a guy is, in the first 2 practices, they've gotten significant high speed yardage, we might be talking to their position coach and saying, hey, let's scale them back a little bit in the upcoming practice. Let's not have this wide receiver running go routes in team period. Let's make sure he's running, shorter routes in his individual periods, so we're not getting him opening up and hitting those high speeds and accumulating more of that high intensity volume right now. We need to rest him a little bit so he's fresh, ready to do that on game day.
Now, in the off season, is there a percentage that you're trying to maintain that too?
So in the off season, this is we'll have a day dedicated to max velocity. We'll do that, and it's the skill and combo guys who are doing that training. The linemen will have a different workout, but we'll build it up over the course of the off season, where eventually we get them trying to hit new PRs, and that's where we're kind of developing that top end speed and trying to hit some of their highest speeds is in the off season. And then we'll do some speed endurance stuff where we try to get them to hit top speed and then hold it for, maintain top speed for 10 yards or maintain it for 15 yards. And we'll build that up over the course of the off season. We think of it in terms of inoculating their hamstrings to those high speeds and exposing them to their highest speeds in the off season. So they've been exposed to that. They're ready to go when they get to camp. And we've also, built up the engine.
So I'm going to expect then that there's a debrief after this session too for the strength staff.
Oh yeah.
So you're up at 4 a.m. and now you're it's 6 at night, 7 at night.
Yep. Yeah. So post practice, we'll come in, got to break down the GPS data, and then we have to do a lengthy report for it that we have to deliver to the coaches. That's going to be discussed in the staff meeting the next morning. So once practice is done, one of us on staff, that was me last year, is breaking down the GPS data, and then we'll have guys coming in wanting to do active recovery type stuff, which we'll have some guys, hands-on in the weight room doing that with the players. I'm breaking down GPS data, getting that report ready, and then, meeting with the head guy, we're looking at the numbers and, okay, who still needs to hit their 90%. Another metric we look at, it's player load. And this is, there's an algorithm within the GPS that looks at a few different variables: total distance covered, it factors in speeds, all these things, and it spits out a number that's basically like a total workload for the day. And that is a metric we'll look at for everyone, big men included. And, we'll look at, okay, did anyone fall way short of what we wanted from a player load standpoint, or is anyone significantly exceeding the player load? And then that's a conversation we'll have with their position coaches and say, hey, this guy, he's had 2 days where he's really kind of exceeded what we're looking for in player load. We may need to scale him back a little bit, or vice versa. Like, hey, this guy's fallen way short. Like, we got to put your foot in his ass and get him going a little bit more. We don't want guys overworking in season, but we also don't want guys underworking. We got to keep them in shape. We got to keep them game ready. And part of that is making sure you're getting enough volume in. So
then there's a balance between the starters and the ones that aren't starting too.
Yeah, there is. So, with the 2 deep guys, we'll treat the backups who might potentially play. We'll treat them like starters, and they're getting the same amount of reps in practice as the starters. We'll have the ones will, do a set amount of plays and 11 on 11, and then the 2s will come in and they're generally getting equal volume, whereas the further down the line guys, the third stringers, they're getting a lot less, but those guys are getting more from us in the weight room. The walk-ons, the guys who we know are probably not going to play, they're in oftentimes either a separate lift or they're just on a separate workout card in season, and we're treating their training more like off-season training for them. And for some of those guys, we'll even do an additional field work session with the strength staff where we're touching on some of the max velocity stuff, getting them some additional field work volume that they're not getting in practice.
So now when we jump to the pros with the demographic you're talking about, you're talking about the same age range, essentially, within 5 years difference. Now you get to the pros, you're dealing with an age range that can be 15 years difference, and they don't have the same regiment. And some of them can have their own private coaches X, Y, and Z that kind of play into all that. So
Oh,
you
yeah.
go from, I don't want to say you go from being a coach to a consultant, but in a way, isn't that kind of what you do?
That's kind of a fair way to put it. I mean, the reality is you don't get to have as big of an impact in pro football from a strength and conditioning standpoint as you do in college. So in the NFL, the season ends, those guys, they scatter. They're off on their own for weeks and weeks, and they don't have to be back for any mandatory activities until like mid-April. So let's say your season ends in, early January, or you've got January, February, March, and half of April before you have to come back. Now, some guys will stay back and train, but you're talking about 20 guys, and it's never the same 20 guys. It's like, okay, 1 week you'll have this 20 guys, and then 5 of those guys go to Cancun, and then you get a different 5 guys in. So it's hard to program for that. You don't have a consistent group that's going to be there for an 8-week period like you do in college ball, where you can write a true 8-week training cycle. In the NFL offseason, it's like, we don't know exactly who's going to be here, how many are going to be here, how many of them are going to be here for a week, and then they're gone and they're back again. And so it's trickier to program for. You don't have as many guys. And then the team comes back for, the start of the true offseason program in mid-April. And then strength and conditioning only gets them to themselves for 2 weeks. And then after those 2 weeks, then they're doing OTAs. They're doing essentially, non-padded practices with the football coaches. So then training shifts more towards almost like an in-season type approach, where we're having to scale back what we're doing to accommodate the fact that they're practicing. That's their priority. So they'll do, 6 weeks or so of OTAs, and then they scatter again. So now that they're gone, they don't have to be with us until the start of training camp. And again, the majority of the team goes off to their private guy. They all just, they've got another home in California. They've got a, separate business venture here and there. So most of the team leaves again, and you'll have, another 20 guys or so stay back, and similar process. You're kind of programming in the dark, and then the guys come back for camp. And it's like, you don't know what kind of training these guys have been doing. You don't know who's just been fucking around and, drinking and hanging out versus who's been training hard, but you don't know what kind of training they've been doing with their private guru guy. And, the football coaches expect them to be in shape and expect them to be prepared for the demands of football. And if guys start getting hurt in camp, usually the finger gets pointed at the strength and conditioning staff. So it's just the off season of the NFL. I did not like that. Just from a strength and conditioning standpoint, it's like, it feels like you can never write a truly effective program that's going to apply to any majority of the team. And then the guys come back, you have no idea what you're playing catch up, trying to figure out who's in shape, who's not, who needs what kind of extra work do certain guys need to get them back up to practice shape, get them back up to speed. So the role of the strength and conditioning coach in the NFL, it's a bigger role in season. The season's so much longer in the NFL. You've got 3 preseason games, and then you've got an 18-week regular season. In college, there's no preseason. You got a 12-game regular season. NFL, 3 preseason games, 18-week regular season, and then potentially another 4 or 5 weeks of the playoffs. So it's long. And like you said, you're dealing with age ranges from 20 years old to 40 years old. And certain guys have been playing for year 16 in the NFL for them. They've got tons of wear and tear and mileage on them. So figuring out how to get these guys through the season, that's really where our job comes in. I hate the term injury prevention, because we can't prevent injuries in football. They're going to happen. But our job in the NFL becomes much more of extending careers. What can we do for this guy just to get him on the field every Sunday? Just trying to keep them healthy, do all we can to fortify them from a soft tissue standpoint, from a joint standpoint, mobility, all those things. So the training focus becomes a lot more in the kind of integrating rehab, medical, hybrid strength coach. That's kind of how most NFL programs are versus college. You're still in there banging weights.
Yeah.
You know,
I've often wondered that if the reason why the playing time in the NFL is as small as it is, which I don't know what it is now, but it used to be 3 years?
about 3 years on average. Yeah.
If that is simply because while they're in college, they have to maintain all these abilities. And if they're still going to maintain some of the abilities just with sport, play, practice, and the things that they do, but not to the same degree. So if they're just losing, bad analogy, but one step every year for 3 years, they're no longer playing at that point.
Right.
Because they're not fast enough, they're not strong enough, they're not where they were. Where if they had the same regiment or just close to the same regiment year round, they probably could get another couple years.
Yeah. And I mean, for a lot of guys, the variable that shortens their career, it's not that they can't play anymore. It's they just don't get signed to a team. They're just not good enough to, a lot of guys that come in the NFL, they don't get drafted. They're an unsigned free agent. They get on a practice squad. They get cut. They bounce to another team. They bounce around for a few years and then just nobody picks them up again. They're out. But to your point, there are a lot of guys who come in who could have had longer careers. And the ones who are smart about their training, smart about their nutrition, know how to take care of their body like a professional, those guys do add years to their career. And that is where the value of a good strength coach in the NFL can come into play. If you can develop trust with the guys to where they want to come back to you in the offseason, they believe in what you're doing, and you can keep them in your program closer to year round, you can do a lot for those guys in terms of adding years to their career, keeping them healthier, keeping them stronger and faster. And, you look at some of these guys who are veterans. I mean, they're hobbling around, just broken bodies. And it's like, Jesus, like, how the hell are we going to get this guy to the field on Sunday? And it's just like, slap some duct tape on him and, piece him back together every week and get him out there. And then somehow these guys that go out in the field and they flip a switch and they just do incredible things. And then, Monday morning they're limping back into the building, and it's like, oh boy, we got 6 days to get this guy ready to go again. So, But yeah, I mean, the ones who know how to take care of their body and, they're not going out partying at the club, staying out late in season, the ones who, and I think nutrition's a big part of this, the ones who know how to eat and actually dedicate time and effort to that. I think that plays a big role in extending careers. But, you see certain guys just take a much more dedicated professional approach to their body, and it pays off and puts more money in their pocket. Now,
you decided to not continue after college, right? And what played into that decision? And second question to that, did you go through the identity crisis afterwards when you were no longer a player because it's all you did since you were a kid?
Yeah. So I had I made the decision to step away from football, which not many people do that. And I decided going into my senior year at UNC as a player that when the season was over, I was done playing. I was not going to pursue the NFL. I was going to go into strength and conditioning, and I was going to compete in powerlifting. That's what I wanted to do. I had the opportunity to go to the NFL. I was a 4-year starter at Carolina, 2-time All-ACC. Realistically, I projected as a, late round draft pick. Probably would have been a 6th, 7th round guy. Never know. May have just been an unsigned free agent, but I would have had a legitimate shot. But my passion was not in football. I was so burnt out on playing football by the time I got to my senior year. I grew up in a football household. It's all I grew up around. Like I said, it's never what I loved, but I knew I loved training. I loved nutrition. I loved everything about that. I was a big fan of powerlifting, with strongman and bodybuilding. I was like, that's what I want to do.
How did this go over with your family?
Well, so I remember sitting in the parking lot about to call my dad, and I talked to my mom first, talked to her about it. But my dad, he's a NFL coach, and he had been such a mentor to me from a football standpoint. And I want to give huge credit to my dad. You see a lot of dads out there who live vicariously through their son. They're the hard ass coach on their kid, and I think because my dad was a successful player, played 12 years in the NFL, he didn't need to live vicariously through me. He just wanted me to be happy. So he was always a dad to me first and a coach second. But nevertheless, I was nervous as hell to tell him that I was deciding to forego the NFL and step away from, the family trade, so to speak. So I remember sitting in the parking lot. I waited there, with his contact pulled up, my thumb hovering over the dial button, just rehearsing in my head, what am I going to say to him? I waited there for like an hour and a half, finally called him and just told him, I was like, I'm making the decision. This is going to be my last year playing football. I'm not going to pursue the NFL, and I'm going into strength and conditioning. And he, there's kind of a pause, but then he was happy for me. He was incredibly supportive. We just talked through the decision a little bit, but he completely supported me the whole way. Not everyone else did. A lot of people did not understand the decision. I had teammates who I'm sure resented me for it, because there are guys who wish they had the opportunity but didn't. There were, other just coaches in my life who were like, what the hell are you doing? But I think big difference between me and a lot of guys who play football is I knew what I wanted to do. You asked about the identity crisis. Most football players, when football's done, they have no idea what the hell they're going to do next. There's no plan B. Football's been it. That wasn't the case for me. I knew for years exactly what I wanted to do, and I stepped away from football under my own power. So there really was no identity crisis for me. And in fact, I feel like I found my identity by stepping away from football as a player and getting into powerlifting, getting into strength and conditioning. Like my identity was kind of in flux as a player. I found it when I stepped away and got into coaching and got into lifting.
But you still couldn't be full meathead because you were the strength coach that's working from 4 a.m. until 8 p.m.
Yeah.
So it's only been recently that you've kind of stepped away from the coaching. Yeah. So now you would be in the full meathead mode. So I would assume you're way happier now.
Yeah, I am. and I'll say this, I was fortunate enough to work for coaches who empowered and supported me in having a passion for strength sports. Like I worked for Joe Ken at the Panthers, and he had been a competitive powerlifter during his strength and conditioning career. He trained his ass off for himself, and he really supported me in that. So I did my first powerlifting meet when I was working for him at the Panthers, and he was a huge supporter of it. He encouraged that. When I went to North Carolina, the guys working for Brian Hess, he was incredibly supportive of me competing in strongman. I remember they even let me miss a game to go do strongman nationals. So I was very fortunate to work for guys who, recognized that I was serious about strength sports and had a talent for it. And a lot of them felt that me being serious about strength sports added to my prowess as a coach, because I was walking the talk, right? And the players saw that. The players respected it. I had skin in the game. And I think that made me a better coach from a programming standpoint, because my own training drove a lot of my creativity. It made me research a lot of, different exercises, different ways of programming, different recovery modalities. I was kind of going through it myself, and I learned a lot about training and programming. I discovered that through my own training, my own competing. And I think that helped me as a coach. So, and it kind of helped from a recruiting standpoint, as I kind of got a bigger following on social media, recruits were into it and stuff. So I did get to kind of live a meathead life, and I was dieting like a bodybuilder. I was bringing, 5 Tupperware meals, and, I was even blending up chicken shakes when I wouldn't have time to eat between lift groups. I just drink my food, but trying to live the life of both being serious about strength sports and a strength coach. I had no work-life balance outside of that, and, destroyed some relationships over it.
With because powerlifting was the first venture, what were some of the things that you had to change programming-wise, just because your structure? Because you're what, 6'7"?
6'7".
6'7". Yeah. At the time, what'd you weigh?
When I got out of football, I was about 315.
Okay.
Now immediately
that's still lean though.
It was pretty lean.
Yeah.
I'm 330 right now, at a much different 330, as far as body composition goes. But when I first got done playing, the first thing I did, this is so stupid, was I got in a keto diet. I had been, I always watched Mark Bell and, a prominent, off-season offensive line guy, LaCharles Bentley, was big on keto diets for his linemen in the off-season. So I was like, I'm going to lose. I want to get lean. I want to get abs. I've been a 22% body fat lineman for years. And so I dieted way down, dropped down to like 265 keto diet. Got
powerlifting at the time?
No, I got weak as hell.
Yeah, I was going to say the squats would be interesting.
I got weak as hell. And I was like, okay, fuck this. So got back on a normal diet, beefed back up and competed at 308, my first lifting meet. But, I'm not exactly built to squat.
Yeah, that's where I was going.
Squat was always an uphill battle for me.
How'd you work around that?
So I was always a posterior chain dominant lifter. I had the classic hip shoot up, good morning squat. I was a very good deadlifter, always a naturally good deadlifter. So, squat, as I got a little older and wiser, I started focusing on quad strength a lot. And every off season, I would start doing a bodybuilding cycle, a bodybuilding training cycle where I would do a ton of hack squats, pendulum squats.
Some more anterior work.
Exactly. A lot of quad biased squat patterns. And by bringing that up, I really kind of changed my squat mechanics to where I was getting a lot more out of my quads and kind of did away with, the hinging forward, and my squat took off from there. I'm still, not a super impressive squatter. My best squat to date's 675, whereas, deadlifted into the mid 800s. But
I think that's one thing a lot of the bigger guys fail to realize is there's a lot of forward motion. Well, you have to have the static strength to keep that from happening. Yeah. And they all want to bias. Well, that static strength is going to come from the erectors and so forth. Well, it's actually the anterior that's going to keep with that.
Yeah. And, I always had interests in powerlifting and strongman and bodybuilding. And I think having kind of a diverse range of things I focused on over the years helped develop me into a holistically better lifter. For example, like with my bench press, when I transitioned to strongman, my first year in strongman, I didn't flat bench press one time. I exclusively overhead pressed, which I was incredibly weak at when I first got into strongman, and I incline pressed. Did that for a year, built up my overhead strength, built up my incline strength, came back and ran a little 4-week mini bench cycle between strongman training cycles and crushed my PR. My previous best bench going into strongman was 465, and then I came in and smashed 500 for 2. So by getting away from powerlifting, doing strongman for a year, focusing on a different style of training, transferred over to powerlifting. And then same thing with the squat. I was very interested in bodybuilding. I got into, kind of periodizing my nutrition like a bodybuilder. And then I'd have a bodybuilding phase every year where I'd be doing a lot of the machine work, the quad bias squat patterns that transferred over nicely to my squat. So I think by kind of having a diverse approach and breaking my year up into phases where I focused on different things, it all kind of came together in making me just a much more well-rounded lifter.
Well, you noted earlier with the NFL guys and now with yourself here, the nutritional aspect. Do you think that they downplay the importance of that and their longevity? And college a little bit different. It's still vital, but they have whatever they want. They just need to make better choices.
Right.
Where, what do you mean by that? So what do you see that they're doing wrong or they could do better?
I just don't think hardly any of them actually
think about it.
They don't think about it. Yeah. Like a lot of those guys, they're still just eating like kids. And, some of them have, personal chefs, but it's amazing. You go into an NFL facility and you see, like at the Texans, I mean, it would be restaurant quality meals served all day long. And I come in there, I'm like a kid in a candy shop. I'm like, oh my, but then you see these guys like turning the food down and they're still eating like 12-year-olds. And I, just for me, I personally mutated when I focused on nutrition. I transformed my body by dieting like a bodybuilder year round. And I really fell in love with that and bought into that because I realized by taking a time where I got really lean, it's set up, and you've worked with Justin Harris, it's set up the rebound phase. And I was able to gain the most muscle tissue I ever had by setting it up with a diet phase. And then I added all this muscle, and then all of a sudden I was that much stronger because I'm putting all this new added tissue to work. I'm leaner in general. I'm recovering better. My blood pressure's better. I feel better. I'm lighter on my feet. So many things improved from a performance standpoint by getting leaner, adding muscle mass, all of these different things. And I think if these pro athletes did anything close to that, I mean, they could do the same. You look at a lot of the NFL offensive linemen. I mean, they're incredibly talented athletes, but a lot of these guys are still 28, 30% body fat. I'm like, dude, if you just dialed in your nutrition and got leaner, I mean, that would probably add years to your career because you'd have a lot less of this just bullshit weight that you're carrying around, just putting a pounding on your joints. Your blood pressure will be better. Your recovery is just, it's better when you're leaner. If you're fat, I mean, you probably have sleep apnea, all these different things, just systemic inflammation. So I think if some of these guys just put more focus in that, not only would they transform their physique, add more muscle, it'd benefit them from a recovery standpoint.
I'm always looking for ways to improve my training, business, life, but none of that matters if my sleep is trash. If your sleep sucks, your recovery and performance is compromised. Sleep is the ultimate recovery tool, and temperature plays a massive role in this. This is where the Chili Pad comes in. It's a water-based, temperature-controlled mattress topper that fits any bed. You can set the temperature from 55 degrees to 115 degrees and even schedule changes throughout the night. It also has dual zone control, so I can stay cool while my wife stays warm. Visit www.sleep.me/tabletalk to get your Chili Pad and save up to $315 with code TABLETALK. This special offer is only for Table Talk listeners and for a limited time. Order today with free shipping and try it for 30 days. If you don't love it, return it for free. Go to www.sleep.me/tabletalk and see why cold sleep is your best ally in performance and recovery. Where would you have them start? I mean, because they're literally starting from probably nothing for breakfast.
The first thing I would have a guy do is just develop some semblance of meal consistency. Like, let's start with, okay, let's get 4 meals in daily. Let's start there. Because like you said, a lot of these guys, it's like on Monday, they eat 2 meals. On Tuesday, they eat 3 meals. On Saturday, they sleep in until 1 p.m. They have 1 meal and then they, go out to the bar and binge. It's like, just let's establish just some form of consistency.
Oh, so you regress way back.
Yeah. I mean, I would just start by, let's just eat the same number of meals daily and don't deviate from that. Let's 4 meals a day, nothing less, nothing more. Let's get you into that routine of just, cause I mean, that's where the hang up is for a lot of these guys, is just having to actually take time out of their day to eat throughout the day. A lot of them, they're just not thinking about it. They'll eat and then hours and hours and hours go by, then they're hungry and then they eat again, but they have no idea what they're not prepared for it. So they just eat whatever's convenient. Whereas let's just get you into routine where you eat X number of meals daily. That's your new thing. Once we get you into that rhythm, that's kind of a new normal for you. Then let's start focusing more on exactly what you're eating. Let's make sure at each one of these meals, you're getting a lean protein source, a complex carb, not even worrying about tracking macros or weighing food or anything like that. If you try to come out the gate with having them weigh their food and calculate macro, you lose the guy immediately. So it's like, let's start with the lowest possible hanging fruit, let them see some results from that, and then kind of take the next step,
What kind of, you have Hammer and Chisel Performance now, mm-hmm. So you work privately. I assume that's what it is, right? So where do you see the hangups with the clients that you're working with just on that end?
Well, the good thing about working in this coaching business I have now, and I do a lot of nutrition work and I do training programming as well, but most of my, any of the football guys I'm working with is for nutrition. The ones who come to me are the ones who are already interested and they care. Whereas if you're on a football team, you've got to work with everyone, and most of them don't want to do this. They don't care. So it's a much different situation versus the guy who's like seeks me out. He's paying me. He's much more bought in. Yeah. He's a lot more likely to follow a plan, and he's probably someone who's interested in it. If you're following me, you're probably into training, into nutrition to some degree. So, it's a little bit of an easier situation.
So what are they looking for when they reach out to you?
A lot of the times, like if it's a lineman, it's off season and they're wanting to get leaner. And that's a time I think bigger guys should focus on their body composition. Season's over. All right. You take a week off or so. Now let's drop some body fat, right? Let's drop some of that bloat, inflammation that's going to help with postseason recovery. Let's spend the front end getting lean. And then as training starts ramping up, we can kind of capitalize on almost a little bit of a rebound and start growing some tissue as off-season training really picks up.
I was going to ask, don't some of those have to worry about losing too much weight?
Yeah. I mean, I'm not going to diet a lineman down to, sub 15% body fat or anything like that.
No, but they can pull a lot of weight off if they're bought in and compliant just in the first 3 weeks.
Yeah.
Because they're a bloated blob.
Yeah, exactly. So, if it's a guy who's carrying a lot of body fat, I'll try to sell them on, I know there's a stigma, you got to be 330, this and that, but you're not going to be playing football for months and months and months. Like, let's take this time while we've got the time to, on the front end, lose some of this body fat. It's going to set you up better. We're going to be able to add more tissue than you probably ever have. We're going to improve your insulin sensitivity. You're going to be way more receptive to calories when we put them back in as we start getting a little bit closer to OTAs and all those things. So I try to sell them on, hey, just trust me on this. If we spend a little bit of time investing on getting leaner, even if we get a little bit lighter than you've always been told you should be, it's going to set you up to then be, back up to your peak weight, but at a much better body composition.
Now, have you played around with them with carb cycling and just flat dieting to see which one works better for them?
So usually I'll start off with just a simple training day versus non-training day split. So, carbs will be higher on their training days, calories are higher, and then on their non-training days, we're going with a lower carb, higher fat approach, and we'll start there. And then if they're compliant, they're following it, we might work in a high day. We might do some refeeds, but usually it's just a training day versus non-training day split. And then I'll push the calories mostly on the training days, and we'll keep the non-training days pretty low. And that helps them stay lean as we're pushing the calories, in their training days. We're fueling them, fueling their output, fueling the recovery, but then we're in a deficit on their non-training days. So that helps them, optimize their training output, but also helps simultaneously keep them lean, keep their appetite up, keep their insulin sensitivity in check. So over the course of their off season, we'll start pushing food higher and higher on their training days and keep the non-training days pretty low.
Now, are you doing their training days, or is that on their own? Or
most of the football guys, they're on their own for that. They're working with their, on site with their guy, or they're with the team. So for almost all my football guys, I'm just doing the nutrition.
Well, I had a brain fart there too. You depending on what division they're playing at, you kind of know what their calorie expenditure is going to be because you did it.
Yeah.
So there is that factor as well.
Right.
That depending upon the time of the year, their calorie expenditure can be through the roof because they have the weight room work, they have the field work, then all the other stuff. So on average, where do you think some of their calories are at?
Oh man, it varies wildly from guy to guy because their metabolisms are so different. I mean, you see some of these fatter linemen and their metabolisms are so sluggish that their calorie intake is lower than you would think it would be. You look at a guy who's leaner, usually their metabolism's higher. They're kind of vaporizing food and processing it quickly. And as you start feeding them, you got to start feeding them more and more and more. Whereas the guy who's 28% body fat and kind of been the fat kid all of his life, they've got a very downregulated metabolism, and their maintenance calories is probably like, I've seen a 330 pound lineman, their maintenance calories were down to like 2,500.
Oh shit.
No, yeah, it's crazy. It's it almost defies science. You see some of these huge guys and like they don't eat. Like, you know, you've got some of them who just can't stop eating, but you've got some of these big linemen who they eat like 2 meals a day. And I'm like, you know, their metabolism is just down-regulated so much, and they're just these genetically huge humans. So a lot of times with a guy like that is, let's build up your metabolism. Let's slowly start introducing more and more food, utilizing carb cycling. So we're not just pushing calories 7 days a week. We're having our low days, but trying to build up the amount of calories you can handle without getting fat, you know, and build up your baseline metabolism from 2,500 or 3,000 calories up to, you know, 3,500 to 4,000 calories. So a lot of those guys, it's kind of rebuilding a metabolism.
So how has the transition been from you going from turf and rubber to basically computer and phone?
Well, it's so one thing is my wife and I, we've got a 9-week-old baby at home. So I'm busy. Me stepping away from football had timed up exactly with when we had our son, and that played a role. That was kind of the hair that broke the camel's back from finally pulling the trigger and stepping away. So, you know, I'm at home, I'm helping with the baby. I'm working with, you know, I've got 85 clients I'm working with, and football guys, powerlifters, strongman, and I get to do one of the primary things I love, which is programming. You know, I've always loved the programming side of things and writing diets. The part I miss, though, is being on the floor with a whistle in hand. You know, you can't replace that. And that is the main thing that I miss about being a football strength coach. I love being in the weight room, the music's banging, you know, you're commanding the room. And, you know, I think that's one of my skills. And, you know, I'm playing around with the idea of opening up a brick and mortar in the near future, just so I can have some of that. But like I said, I'm getting to do all the programming stuff. It feels weird right now in this time of year, not being in a facility, not coaching on site. But, you know, I'm getting to focus more than ever on my own training and, you know, filming that, and it plays into my own marketing and doing all my own, you know, content creation and stuff. It's crucial for my business. So I'm able to pour more into my own training than ever, which, you know, I love. That's still, you know,
well, it's full meathead mode, right?
Yeah, exactly. Full meathead mode. So I'm kind of living like a professional bodybuilder in a sense, and, you know, working with a videographer and making YouTube videos, social media content, and then, you know, busy as hell with a ton of clients. I'm running my own podcast right now, so I've been having some fun with that. And then anytime I'm not doing work, I'm with the wife and the baby. So I'm busy, and it's a new challenge, and learning the business side of everything. So the fact that I've got a new challenge has occupied my mind, and, you know, it's been fun for me. But yeah, you know, you see the Instagram videos of the teams, and they're going through their training and stuff. It's like, you know, it'd be nice to be there on, you know, heavy squat day, banging it out with the boys. But
yeah, but you're not thinking about it. It would be nice to be there to do the recaps.
Yeah, exactly. No, exactly. Like, I never could have done this, for example. Like, we'd be in the middle of the work week. You know, I'd be coming home after a 12-hour work day, tired as hell, and get a, you know, couple hours with my son. And, you know, it'd be a lot harder to be a dad and a husband, and, you know, sure as hell wouldn't be able to focus on my own training at that point or anything like that. And just so much of being a football strength coach is, you know, you get into it because you love the training and the programming, the coaching. So much of the job is not that. You know, so much of the job is recruiting and dealing with the football coaches and the football practice. Like, so much of your year as a football strength and conditioning coach is doing nothing in the weight room.
Well, I wonder, because most of you guys get in it from the start, you know, either interns or working, so they don't know work in any other realm. Right. So while it's 12 hours, you didn't know any difference in the 12 hours. Right. Yeah. And we don't see people that have been 10 years out, you know, working as a personal trainer or whatever it is, going into the university setting. Right. While it sounds demanding to anybody that's listening to this that doesn't do it, it's really not, because it's all you ever know.
It's all I've ever known.
Right, until you get out of it. Okay, this is a weird question. I know it, because it's going to differ depending upon who you're working with, especially now, because you're working with individuals. So the question is, how would you describe your training philosophy? I get it. It depends upon who you're working with. I know that's the default answer, but everybody, you've been through a lot of different programs,
Right.
From the strength and conditioning side, but then also strongman, powerlifting, and so forth. From all that, what would be the underlining principles?
You look at most people, a lot of them have the same general weaknesses and deficiencies. So from a training standpoint, when I start working with someone new, I'll write an initial block where I'll be having them do movements like front squatting, single leg stuff, overhead pressing. A lot of the times people suck at these things.
Yeah.
And by evaluating them on movements like this, I can get a sense of some of their weaknesses. And then I'm exposing them to things they're probably just bad at already. So I like to start off by kind of building a base there. I'll oftentimes play around with some tempo work in my first block, working with someone, just some slow eccentric type stuff, like with the front squat, doing slow tempo front squats, just evaluating and developing their ability just to maintain an upright posture, controlling weight to depth, evaluating their ability to brace. And then same thing kind of with the overhead pressing. A lot of guys, they're extremely deficient in any sort of an overhead press, or you put them on a single leg movement. I'll have them do a dumbbell rear foot elevated split squat on a slow tempo. And you see guys do that and they're shaking like a leaf, and they're extremely weak on one leg. So I like to start off with a block working on what is probably going to be weaknesses and deficiencies for most people, to not only develop that base, but also gives me some insight into how they move and where some of those deficiencies are that we can start focusing.
So like an adaptation phase.
Yeah.
So now with that, are you using any movement screens or anything that you may have used with the players before?
Well, I'm a little bit more limited, just when you're doing the remote coaching. That's one of the reasons I don't want to say I prefer it. I almost prefer the remote side of nutrition coaching because it's very black and white. I write a diet, you're either following it or you're not.
Yeah.
Whereas with training, I can write a great program. One person might execute it one way and another person executes it a different way. For a minute, you can't really regulate intensity. And, if I tell them an RPE 8 or take a set to failure, if you're not in there with them, you don't exactly know if they're doing that. And then from a movement pattern standpoint, I'll have people send in videos to me and I'll give them a voice memo back and coaching them through everything I'm seeing. But it's just different than being there in person with them. And that's always a little bit of an area where things get a little bit lost. So I would love to be able to be in there with them, kind of just putting them through a borderline basic movement screen. Like with our incoming freshmen at UNC, their first week there, we wouldn't have them touch a barbell squatting. We would have them do a kettlebell goblet squat on a slow eccentric, a 3-2-1, pause at the bottom, eccentric. We'd evaluate their ability to move from there. We do some, kettlebell RDLs. Basically, do they know how to hinge? We'd work on all the very basic movement patterns. We'd have them do tempo push-ups and big men would do eccentric only chins. And those first couple weeks we're identifying, okay, who are our good movers, who are very poor movers. And then we'd have them graduate to a front squat. Then we'd have them graduate to a box squat. And then certain guys we'd identify like, okay, he's pretty advanced at this point. We can accelerate him, get him integrated with the general population team faster. Whereas, okay, this guy is very remedial. He's coming from a high school program where they probably didn't train at all. We're going to have to really slow cook this guy. He might not do a free barbell back squat till the end of the summer.
So by default with the people you're working with, you're going to put them in that first phase, just by default, because that's where most people are going to be weak.
Yeah.
I would agree with that.
Yeah.
And then how long that phase is going to last is going to depend upon what their skill level is.
Yeah, exactly. So I'll be evaluating video, getting their feedback, and then identifying, okay, what kind of mover is this guy? Can this guy properly brace? How's his body control? How's his core strength? How's his single leg strength? Where the glaring weaknesses, and then just, some people I need to slow cook them and just develop that base of just like, developing some of those glaring deficiencies that they have, just getting them moving better in general, before we graduate to, more of the advanced movements. But then on the other hand, if I'm working with, a strongman competitor or more of an advanced power lifter or a guy like that, I'm not going to waste their time, with, a super remedial training block. I'll ask them for footage from their last competition. So a powerlifter, do you have your meet footage, and talk about their meet prep and get their own feedback. What are your strengths? What are your weaknesses? And generally, if I'm working with, a powerlifter or strongman for the first time, I prefer to take them on when we can start with an off season, as opposed to starting with someone in a prep. That way I can learn a lot about them in an off season. As opposed to if we're just jumping into prep, for a strongman, we're having to base training around just getting them ready for the 5 events that they have to be ready for. Mm-hmm. So I try to take competitors on when we can start in an off season. I'll get their feedback on strengths and weaknesses, and I'll build the initial program around that and then evaluate from there.
So the program is built in blocks?
Yep. I'll generally operate in 4-week blocks for the most part.
All right. And then how would those progress?
So it depends on who it is. If it's, the strongman competitor or the powerlifter. Like the strongman, we need to have a lot more variety of ability.
And powerlifting's easy. So if it's strongman, let's stay there because there's more variety.
Yeah.
More attributes that have to be accounted for.
Yeah. So I oftentimes like to start with, we use a triphasic approach with the Texans for our off-season guys, where we do, an initial few weeks of a lot of slow eccentric work. We do a few weeks of isometric work with tissue prep in mind, preparing the tissue for the demands of the sport that's coming. And I think that's valuable for strongman competitors. I mean, the sport itself is very hard, very demanding on your body. You see, guys are constantly getting injured in strongman. So I like to start off with some of the slow eccentric work, kind of with the tissue durability in mind. And it's got to be a very holistic approach. It's got to be a top-down, no stone unturned approach with strongman competitors. They got to be able to press overhead. They've got to be strong on one leg. All of their moving events, when they're moving with a yoke or moving with a heavy farmer carry, if they're weak unilaterally, that's going to show up in those heavy moving events. So we'll probably do a bunch of single leg work on the front end, starting with, preparing the tissue so when they get to those 1,000-pound yokes, we've fortified the joints, fortified the soft tissue in some of those earlier blocks. And then we can get into some of the more strongman specific type training. We'll do a lot of GPP on the front end as well. Just there's a much higher conditioning demand in strongman, depending on the competition, but strongmen have to be in shape. So we're going to develop some level of aerobic conditioning on the front end. And that might be, bike or rower type stuff. It might be conditioning with strongman implements, like doing every minute on the minute light, yoke runs. Might be, 10 by 10 yards every minute on the minute with a light yoke or a farmer carry or a sandbag front carry. So as far as the strength training goes, we'll start off with, like I said, a lot of the tissue prep stuff, slower eccentrics, touching on single leg, touching on, unilateral pressing. We'll do some rotational work, just kind of building a base in that regard, getting their body prepared for the more grueling training that's to come, but then also touching on a lot of the conditioning. And then from block to block to block, we'll get more into, strongman specific type stuff, overhead pressing with axles and logs, deadlifting. Usually for a deadlift in the earlier blocks, I'll start with regressed variations. So we might start with, a wide grip RDL on a slow tempo with a pause at mid shin. Then the next block will go to a regular grip RDL. So now the loads are going to be heavier. Then we're going to go to, a deadlift from the floor. We might have a pause there. So just really starting with a variation that's going to force them to go lighter while still giving them a challenging stimulus, and then getting to heavier and heavier and heavier variations. So then by the time we get to actual deadlifting, their erectors have been progressively exposed to load over the course of our time together.
So you like to keep the same variation throughout the whole period and just regress it back.
Yeah.
Would that be true with all the main movements?
Yeah. So like for the, and it might deviate with certain individuals, but for, in strongman, there's always going to be some sort of a deadlift event, and of course it's going to be a different deadlift event every time. It might be a deadlift from, blocks. It might be a side handle deadlift, whatever. But if we're in off-season mode, I'll generally regress just a deadlift from the floor. And we'll start with, one of the more difficult RDL variations and work our way to the floor.
Mm-hmm. Now with your own training, I'm going to assume that your off season is more bodybuilding. Mm-hmm. And then as you get into the strength sport, so you're kind of periodizing based upon the sport.
Yeah.
As that plays in. What are some of the challenges that you've had to overcome with the powerlifting and strongman, injuries or just stupid shit that pops up? Because we're talking like we assume everything's just fluid. Yeah. And it's not. There's always going to be those challenges. So what are some of them we had to deal with?
Well, inevitably I go through phases where I'm so mentally invested in strength and, I've got my sights totally set on powerlifting and strongman. And then I get to the end of a strongman training cycle and my body hurts and I'm broken down and I'm starting to get burnt out on it. And that's when I started really working in, true bodybuilding phases. It gives me a physical and a mental break in a sense. So I break my year up into, bodybuilding phases where it's very body composition focused. I'll diet down, and over the course of the diet, I don't necessarily do pure bodybuilding training. I might be doing some strongman stuff during that time, but the focus is really just getting leaner. Mm-hmm. Then I'll do a growth phase where it's true bodybuilding training. It's machines, it's cables, it's dumbbells, it's all purely hypertrophy focused. Spend 12 to 16 weeks adding tissue, and I'm getting to the end of that phase right now. And then once I've built the tissue, then my focus shifts. Okay, let's take this new tissue we added and make it strong, and then we'll go into a powerlifting or a strongman phase. Now, I had an injury in 2020. I had a badly herniated disc that impinged a nerve, and I've lost quite a bit of function in my right leg. My right calf is basically shot. I rehabbed strength above the knee in my right leg significantly to I can squat, I can deadlift, I can clean and push press and do all those things. But I don't want to say it was career ending from a strongman standpoint, but I haven't competed in strongman in a few years now because of that injury. I just became so limited on the heavy moving events. Like I couldn't do a heavy yoke without risking blowing an Achilles because this right calf. Mm-hmm. So I got more into powerlifting during my strength phases, but I've got the itch to do strongman again. So once I'm done, with this bodybuilding cycle I'm in, I'm going to be transitioning into strongman. And, with strongman, it's kind of staying healthy. It tends to be the challenge because the demands of the sport, the awkward implements you're having to train, it puts a lot of wear and tear on you. And programming for strongman, it's this big puzzle because everything is lower back taxing. In powerlifting, You've got your bench days, right? Where it's a true upper body day. Well, the upper body days in strongman, it's a log clean and press, which that's still a full body movement, or it's an axle press or a circus dumbbell. Every event in strongman is going to be taxing on your whole body. So putting together the puzzle from a programming standpoint, how do I train all 5 of these events, without just completely destroying myself? Like, how do I get enough of a training stimulus for each of these events without them overlapping from a fatigue standpoint? So that's the hardest part about programming for strongman.
How do you think that looks like? Because before you start all this, you're going to have a basic plan, right? It's going to change like all plans, but how are you putting that together in your head before you begin that phase? Because you're close to beginning that phase now.
Yeah. So I like to ideally pick out a show where I know what are the 5 events I need to train for.
Yeah, good.
And then start preparing. Yeah, and start preparing myself for that. If that's not the case, I'll just have 5 events that I'm going to train for, even if it's not in competition. There'll be some variation of an overhead press, some variation of a deadlift, a moving event, some sort of a stone event, and then, some miscellaneous event. Might be a throw, might be, and I'll train for those 5 events. I like operating with A and B weeks, where in week A, I'm putting the focus on, these 3 events, and the other 2 events, those are being trained lighter or being trained in, a dynamic effort format. Or if it's a moving event, if I've got a heavy yoke on week A, it'll be heavy yoke. On week B, it'll be a light yoke working on foot speed and technique. So I'll bounce back and forth between A and a B week. Sometimes I'll even have an A, B, C week and rotate through that, where each week the priority is on a different event. That's the event that's getting trained heavier. It's being prioritized within the week. And then the other events, it's either technique work, it's submaximal volume work, or it's dynamic effort work.
Now, are you still bleeding in bottom end hypertrophy work during these phases?
Always. Yep. I always keep some degree of hypertrophy work in. I spent so long building this tissue, I'm going to retain it.
So what would that look like? It's just at the end of the training days, or are those on different days?
Yeah, so I'll usually build out my training sessions for strongman where there will be an event or 2, a main supporting accessory movement, which is usually going to be some sort of a barbell movement. If I've got a log clean and press, I'll usually have a front squat in there, just having that anterior load. It complements the anterior loaded front squat and stones and all that. So I'll have a main, supporting barbell movement, and then I'll have some lower tier hypertrophy based accessory stuff. So I'll go event, main supporting barbell movement, lower tier hypertrophy based accessory stuff.
Then you regulate that based upon how the training's going.
Yeah. Exactly.
Right. So if the first exercise beats the shit out of you, you adjust the second.
Exactly.
Or you pull out the third.
Yep. Yeah. So the lower tier stuff, it's always kind of subject to change and how I'm feeling. The accessory stuff, it'll be more of a muscle group focus as opposed to movement. I know that with my accessory stuff, okay, I want to get a good tricep stimulus or a good quad stimulus, assess how beat up am I from the main work I've done. And then, maybe I had, a certain movement for quads planned. I'm just beat to shit. So I'm going to pivot and just do, a leg extension or something.
So how do you explain this to other people? Right. So it could be if it's a group session, like a seminar, or you're just trying to mentor, another strength athlete, because this, I think, is one of the most important aspects of training in general. Is the ability to, we can talk about auto-regulate, but
sure.
I don't think people think about that deep enough, because you're auto-regulating the day, but you got to keep in mind, here's training day Monday, here's training day Wednesday. What I do Monday is going to impact Wednesday. The same workout may happen that next Monday. So it's, how's this impact this Wednesday? How's that impact that next Monday? So there's a systemic fatigue. But then there's that more localized, where that first movement can go real well. And you're like, fuck yeah, I'm going to go more, right? Yeah. We stupidly do.
Right.
And then we don't adjust as we go down, where you get it. I mean, we get what we're talking about, but this is one of the hardest things I have to try to get other people to understand.
Yeah, I mean, it was hard for me too in my earlier years to do that, because like I go in, I've got a plan, and to deviate from that plan felt like a failure. If I wrote it down on paper or had a coach program it for me, I was going to do it no matter what. And it felt like accepting defeat if I kind of pivoted or adjusted based on, like you said, that local fatigue. But as I've gotten older and wiser, I've realized this is just what I need to do. And how do you explain that to someone? A lot of the times it boils down to just experience. I would encourage more of a novice lifter to work with a coach who, kind of takes those decisions out of your hand. But then, you got to make sure that's a situation where you've got good communication with your coach. And, if you're working with someone remotely, that's one of the downfalls versus working with the guy in the gym with you who can watch you do your main supporting barbell movement and observe the fact that, okay, this guy's getting way more fatigued than we want him. Let's, regress the accessory work and things like that. So, working with a coach who's got the ability to make those decisions for you, that can oftentimes be helpful. But as far as getting someone to be able to do it themselves, it usually boils down to experience and kind of doing it almost the wrong way enough to where you realize, like, I can't do it this way. I've got to be able to auto-regulate and I've got to be able to pivot. And, I think it comes down to just like accepting and believing that this stuff is for the greater good. Like for my younger self, I wouldn't have been able to pivot or change the program because, like I said, it'd feel like a defeat. Whereas now it's like, I know that this is just going to help me long term. It's not a defeat. You've got to be willing to, don't look at your training in a vacuum, right? It's not just about any one session. Like you said, this session is going to affect the next session, which is going to affect the next session, which will affect the next week. Like, you've got to be able to step back and just look at training from a broader perspective and not put so much stock in any one given day, and look at the entire program as kind of this organism and like just not being too attached to any one singular day, just making decisions that's going to benefit the big picture.
Well, to flip this completely on its head, there's also the people that can become really good at auto-regulating in the program and all this, where their biggest issue is the nutritional side.
Yeah.
So they wouldn't have to auto-regulate as much if their nutrition was on point and they actually had the fuel to be able to get through the training and recover from the training. So how often do you see that one as well?
I always tell lifters, nutrition's probably the missing piece of the puzzle for you. Training was my first love, but I'm at a point now where I put equal, if not more, stock into the nutrition than I do the training. Now, if I'm in competition prep, it's different. Like the training is everything from a skill development standpoint, all that stuff. But big picture, it's almost blasphemy to say, I would almost project a better long-term outcome for a lifter who was super dialed in with nutrition and maybe, mediocre with training, as opposed to the guy who's super dialed in, great training program, but just shitty nutrition their entire career. Your ability to just build up your body over the course of your training career and your body composition, your ability to add tissue to your frame, and like you said, your ability to recover. I think all that is going to be a lot more affected by nutrition. And if you can take your body composition to new places, add more tissue as a result of nutrition, and optimize your digestion, your gut health, which allows you to take in and process more food over time and, actually utilize all the food you're eating beneficially. You're recovering better, you're sleeping better, you're growing better. And because you're growing better, now you're getting stronger. I think lifters who focus on the nutrition just as much as they do their training, that allows them to go next level.
To circle back to one of the topics we talked about earlier was culture and community. You come from the sports side, football, which is, as we discussed, the culture and community can actually outweigh the shitty training.
Yeah.
Where now you're in this sector to where it's all probably overemphasized on the training, where the culture and the community is radically different.
Yeah.
So what lessons could you see coming from the football side that could help enhance the strength and conditioning private sector, powerlifting, strongman, strength sports?
I think
it's almost the opposite.
Yeah. I mean, having been through a strength and conditioning program as a player, getting into bodybuilding and strongman and powerlifting, I don't want to say it was easy, but I became just a grittier, harder edged human by going through football strength and conditioning, being disciplined, being coached hard, going through a system where you had to meet a standard, and the standard was the standard. And if you deviate from the standard, you're going to fucking pay for it. You know, that instills just a certain mindset and a certain grit into you that a lot of people who haven't gone through it don't have, you know. And like in football, if you showed up a minute late for your lift, like, you were getting punished, or the group was getting punished. You know, you were going to give full effort, or you were going to get brutally called out. And that elevates you. Now you've got a fire under your ass. You've got your teammates around you who you're competing with, and they're pushing you. Your coaches are pushing you, and you know you can't fall out of the line, because then you're going to be the outcast. You're going to be the weak link. And I think that drove all of us to elevate our own effort and game. And, you know, getting out of that, you know, like working with a diet coach, like working with Justin, he's talking about, oh, we'll have this, you know, cheat meal so you don't cheat on your diet. I'm like, I'm not going to cheat on my diet. Like, what are you talking about? You give me a diet to follow, I'm going to execute this no matter how hungry I get. Like, it was the idea of just deviating from this plan a coach gave me was like a foreign concept to me. And I think that's something that was instilled in me in football. And, you know, you walk into a powerlifting gym, and this is something that I think, like, Westside just, and I've never trained at Westside, so I don't want to speak to it, but from the outside looking in, it seems like the culture there was almost the thing that really separated you guys, was just being in there with some just hard-nosed guys who were pushing each other and just creating this high competition environment. And I'm sure there was a standard. Mm-hmm. Like, if guys were showing up late, or guys weren't putting in 100%, guys are, I'm sure, getting called out. Yeah. Right. And I think that I'm sure it pushed you all to be better. Yeah. Right. And I think if you could have that in, you know, if you're a powerlifter or a strongman, if you have that environment when you're training where you're competing against guys, they're pushing against you, you've got this mindset of just a harder edge, blue collar mindset, you know, and a standard in your mind to uphold, a standard that you apply to your training, to your diet, to the way you live your life. I mean, I think that would help guys in ways they couldn't imagine.
They're going to have to do it independently, though, because
that's the hard thing.
You know, that's going to be the harder thing, because it wasn't developed otherwise. So with the people that you're working with, that you see that is one of the weak links, you know, what are you suggesting them to be able to develop that?
Well, you know, the people I'm coaching, I try to, you know, and that was one of the hard things for me when I first got into this, was people who didn't have that mindset, people who were, you know, I didn't follow the diet this week, and I'd want to get mad. Like, I'd want to jump on them like I would with my players. But then, you know, you step back, you're like, all right, this is a different environment. But I try to just have a conversation with them and try to just make them understand, like, hey, you've made a commitment to this. Like, you owe it to yourself to put everything you have into this. And, you know, so I'm there as a coach. I'm there as that voice to try to push them and to hold them accountable. And I think that's one of the biggest assets that, you know, a coach serves to people in this situation is just the accountability factor. But as far as if you're not working with a coach, you don't have that presence to push you and to hold you accountable. I don't know if that's something you can really teach, mm-hmm. to be honest. It was instilled in me at a very young age, and I just don't know anything different. And I think sometimes if that just hasn't been instilled in you, or if it's just not who you are, I don't know if you can truly just develop that in someone later in life.
So how do you plan on instilling this in your child?
Oh, that's a good question. Well, I'm never going to push my son into doing anything. Like, I don't want to force him into football or to lifting. Like, I want him to find something that he is passionate about. But once he has found that thing that he's passionate about, I hope that I can instill in him the mindset that trying just to be great at what you do. Like, that's people need to do hard things. People need to be challenged. That's something that I need in my life. Like, I need to have something that's hard, that's pushing me, that I'm working towards, that I care deeply about, that I have to work hard for. So I hope I can encourage my son to find the thing that he's passionate about, and then just teaching him to understand that, or having the mindset to be great at that thing, and to love it, and to be willing to sacrifice for it. Now, how exactly I'm going to do that, I'll learn it over the years.
Correct me if I'm wrong, but through your own story with football, this may come across the wrong way, but I think you're going to understand where I'm going. You never were 100% passionate about it. Right. So 98, 90, whatever it's going to be, that you still had to be great at it. I think this is kind of where some of the disconnect is with people, is even if it was 80% or 70%, your effort's not changing, your intensity's not changing, your ability to want to be the best that you actually can at it's not changing just because it's not 100%. Because if people are chasing that 100%, I don't think they're ever going to find it in anything. Right. But that may dictate where that discipline and focus is going to be. Because you see them, because that whatever that gap percentage is, has a really fucking strong voice. Yeah. A stronger voice than the other one. And that voice is like, oh, we don't need to do this, or, we can push this meal to here, or, whatever it's going to be. That's radically strong.
Yeah. And with football, although it wasn't what I loved, I felt an immense accountability to my teammates or to my coaches. Like, I did give.
Yeah. I'm not saying that,
I gave everything to it, and maybe I didn't love it, but I've got all these people who are counting on me. The stakes are so high. I've got these coaches whose jobs are on the line if I don't perform. I've got, a team, we're all playing for a championship. Like, I'm competitive by my nature. Like, I'm not going to let these guys around me, see me as a weak link or anything like that. So I had all these other motivating variables pushing me, even though, maybe it's not what I truly love doing.
But your effort and your intensity and all the other wouldn't have been any higher if it was that 100%. That's kind of where I'm going.
Oh,
you see, that's where I'm going there. As people are, I think they look for that, that 100% type thing. And first off, they assume that's going to drive them all the time, where that's not the case with any fucking thing that we do. Even with the strongman you're training, a lot of this stuff just sucks. Right? It just sucks. Yeah. Right? If it all was good, then, it's a lie. Anyway, they tell you that's lying. But the point I'm trying to make here is all the factors that go into being great are still there because you're doing it.
Yeah.
Right. Otherwise you wouldn't do it. Right. So that's the mindset that we're talking about, is if you're going to do something, then put in, and you're going to commit to it, then put in everything that you have to become the greatest that you can be at it. Yeah. Otherwise, don't fucking do it, or be it a hobby or whatever it's going to be.
Yeah, no. And I agree with that. And, nowadays I'm very kind of all or nothing guy. Like you said, if I'm going to do it, I'm going to fucking do it all out. Otherwise I can't just do a happy medium in my life. And I don't know if that's just, it's just something in my nature, just personality, and just natural to certain competitors. I don't know if that's a thing that is taught and learned. Not everyone lives that way. That's for sure. Not everyone goes through life putting in 100% into anything or attempting to be great at anything.
The way I can always look at the things where I never wanted to look back and say, what if? Yeah. On anything, because that would drive me fucking insane. Yeah. And being able to not say that is a blessing at the end. Yeah. Because you can say, I may have done this different or whatever it was, but given the circumstances, knowledge, all the other kind of stuff, you don't want to look back and say, what if, on any of it.
Yeah, for sure. And like I said, like I need to be doing something hard. Like I need to be doing something that I am putting 100% into. Like I need a challenge. You know, people talk about, you know, I've got people in my life say like, oh, I just want to retire at 50 and just kind of be golfing and on the beach. I'm like, that sounds like a miserable life to me. Like I don't want a life of ease and comfort. Like I need something that that makes me nervous, that I've got to put everything into. I'm striving to get better at. And, you know, there's some high stakes with it. Like I need that. And I don't think that's everyone though.
Yeah. Were there any topics you wanted to go over I didn't bring up?
Not necessarily. I think you covered a lot of it.
How did you come up with the name of your company?
Hammer and Chisel Performance. So that was kind of the dichotomy between just kind of, you know, brains and brawn, kind of, you know, having an intelligent approach to things, but also just in the trenches, hard-nosed, meathead approach to things. You know, the training and the nutrition, you know, I've always kind of had those two different aspects. And, you know, you got the hammer, that's the force, the blunt object, and the chisel. That's kind of your refining, your, you know, you're dialing in all the pristine, precise edges. And that's always kind of how I've approached things as a coach and as a lifter. I've always tried to bring, you know, like I said, the hard-nosed meathead side of things, but also bringing an intelligent, refined approach as well. So that was the inspiration for the name.
How can people go about finding you?
Yeah, so you can find me on Instagram at what_the_heck71 or just John Heck. That's where, you know, people can reach out to me for coaching. I've got a podcast, Hammer and Chisel Performance Podcast, on Spotify, YouTube, and then my website, hammerchiselperformance.com. And you'll be selling, that'll be, by the time this comes out, the website will be live. Be selling some programs and eBooks, and then my coaching services on there.
Great. Love following your content, listening to your podcast, and
yes,
keep doing what you're doing. And thanks for coming out.
Yes, sir. It's been an honor to be here.
We're done.
All right.
All content you see on this channel and at elitefts.com is created by, take a guess, Elite FTS. If you want to help support the content, head over to elitefts.com and pick up literally anything that you need to be able to get more jacked and strong.